Springfest is happening now at Lowe's. Keep the spotlight on your yard with Stay Green Premium 2 cubic foot mulch, 5 bags for $10. Plus, when you want more help indoors, get up to 40% off select major appliances that help you supercharge your chores. Our best lineup is here at Lowe's. Valid to 4/22 while supplies last. Selection varies by location. See Lowe's.com for details. Mulch offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii.
Chronic migraine, 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more, can make me feel like a spectator in my own life.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine. It's not for those with 14 or fewer headache days a month. It's the #1 prescribed branded chronic migraine preventive treatment.
Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Why wait? Ask your doctor, visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com, or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
For the News and Observer, I'm Dawn Vaughan, Capitol Bureau Chief and host of Under the Dome. This is our year-end 2025 look back with the lens of what it means as we head into 2026 for North Carolina politics. For the first half, I'm joined by my politics team colleague, reporter Kyle Ingram, as we discuss big stories of the year in state politics and government. And after the break, I'll be joined by our D.C. correspondent, Danielle Battaglia, for a look at the federal government's big news and the impact on our state. So, Kyle, let's start with the biggest story, one of the biggest stories of the year, and that you've, really just like full coverage for the beginning of 2025. And that is the judicial branch of government and this race that never seemed to end from the last election. So for anyone who has been living under a rock or forgot because it was several months ago now, what am I talking about?
Yeah, so it was a 6-month legal battle over the results of the 2024 North Carolina Supreme Court election. It was extremely close. We didn't really know what the final results were on Election Day. After all the outstanding provisional and absentee ballots were counted, it had Democratic incumbent Allison Riggs ahead by 734 votes over her Republican challenger, Jefferson Griffin. And what started from there was a legal battle, the likes of which North Carolina had never seen, potentially the country had never seen, where Griffin challenged his loss in court and alleged that over 65,000 ballots were invalid and should potentially be thrown out. And that would have in his ideal scenario, would have reversed the outcome of the race and made him the winner. So
remind people of how this was more politics involved than just a particular race. And like people have described this as kind of a test case to see what could happen in future elections.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, people had never really seen a election dispute of this scale and of this significance. Of course, there have been contested elections in the past, but to wholesale call into question the legitimacy of 65,000 ballots was really unprecedented. And you had him arguing not necessarily that these voters themselves had committed any sort of fraud, but rather that the rules in place at the time of the election should not have been the rules. So there was a dispute over the fact that a large amount of those voters didn't have a driver's license number or social security number attached to their voter registration. There were a lot of reasons why that might be. It could have been due to a mismatch with databases. It could have been because someone's last name changed. And then he was also arguing that voters who were in the military or who lived overseas and cast their ballots should have had to provide a photo ID. North Carolina's voter ID law had an exception for them in place at the time of the election. So it was a very unprecedented legal challenge. And you had scholars, you had activists, you had even another Republican on the North Carolina Supreme Court warning that if this sort of challenge was given any legitimacy, it could call into question the results of elections for decades to come and always create the incentive for this sort of costly, chaotic post-election litigation.
So this was wrapped up in the spring, I guess, was the end, right?
Yeah, I believe it was May. So this case ping-ponged many times between state and federal courts. Griffin got some partial wins at the state level. The state was planning to potentially go through a cure period where many of the voters whose ballots had been called into question would have been asked to prove their legitimacy in order to make their votes count. But a federal judge later stopped that from happening and very decisively said, this cannot continue. Allison Riggs won the election. The state needs to certify her. And after that ruling came down, Griffin conceded.
So what does this mean for the 2026 election? A lot? Nothing? Something we could see again?
I mean, it all depends on how willing people are to try and undergo something this expensive and this closely watched again. I mean, there's always the potential for 2026 to be a very close race. We have a lot of very close races in North Carolina, particularly for the Supreme Court. And there is another Supreme Court election happening in 2026. Another Democratic incumbent, Anita Earls, is up for re-election. She's running against Sarah Stevens, a Republican state lawmaker. If that race is particularly close, who knows if another legal challenge similar to Griffin's is tried again. And like I mentioned, the North Carolina Supreme Court, which is currently dominated by Republicans, did give Griffin some partial wins in his case, and they might be willing to entertain a case like this again in the future.
All right, well, let's move on to the biggest story of the year, which also is going to extend into 2026 for the legislative branch and a little bit of the executive branch. This has been the first year of Democratic Governor Josh Stein's time in office, and lawmakers at the General Assembly never sent him a budget. So in the past, it would be a battle between Democratic governor, Republican-controlled legislature, and that was really the focus of the budget battle. Some infighting between the House and Senate, which are both controlled by Republicans, but usually by at least the fall, the issue had gotten to the executive mansion. That didn't happen this year because Republican House Speaker Dustin Hall and Republican Senate Leader Phil Berger have not come to an agreement on the comprehensive budget. They passed, I think, just 3 of these tiny little spending bills that were so small, I don't even think they're worth calling a mini budget. Unlike the last time where there wasn't a budget in 2019, there were a lot of these mini budget bills, including raises and other things, and they really just haven't gotten anywhere. So as we are looking into 2026, it is the second year of the 2-year legislative session. So because state law doesn't require them to pass a budget in 2025, the fiscal year is already halfway over, then they can come together and do one really anytime. They don't have to wait till the short session starts in April because they haven't even adjourned yet. There are dates in January, February, and March. Another outstanding thing is Medicaid rebase funding, and that's been a fight, I guess more of a fight between Stein and lawmakers. Can you think of anything else, Kyle, that really was like between the legislative and executive branches this year? Well, the state auditor changes.
Yes, I mean, there's been, as there often are in the legislature, attempts to strip the executive branch or really any position controlled by Democrats of some power and put that back into the legislature's hands. Technically, this one did happen at the end of 2024, but there was that bill, Senate Bill 382, that took away the governor's power to appoint a majority of members to state and local election boards and gave that to the auditor instead, who is a Republican. He is the only auditor in the country who is vested with that power. So that has been interesting to watch play out this year. That bill took effect in May. Since then, the State Board of Elections and all 100 county board of elections have flipped to Republican control, and we're going to start seeing how these boards carry out their duties differently than when the boards were in Democratic control. The boards are going to be tasked very shortly with, the state board is going to have to approve early voting plans soon for the 2026 midterms. We've already seen some disagreements about whether or not to allow voting on Sundays, whether or not to open early voting sites on college campuses. These are both things that have very partisan sides to them, and we could see distinct changes now.
Kyle, who's also our democracy reporter, will have a lot more extensive coverage of all the ins and outs of voting laws and things that happen for the primary, and then on to the general. And as we were saying, with the lack of the state budget in 2025, that's going to be a dominant issue in 2026. And really, the tax battle is what I'm referring to it as. It's this fight between the House and Senate. All of you all listened to this before, have heard us talk about it many times, over these future tax cut revenue triggers for reducing the individual income tax rate. I think what will happen is if Berger and Hall come to some sort of middle ground, or one wins or the other, they are going to need to think about how the state spending is going to change. And the teacher pay issue, which is a big House priority, the Opportunity Scholarship Program, which is expensive, capital projects, which are expensive, and just looking at these big pots of money, one-time money and recurring money, and how much the state wants to keep funding things, and if there needs to be some sort of shift. So because there is also still economic uncertainty going into the new year.
Well, I wanted to ask you, Dawn, so this is Hall's first year as Speaker, and the former Speaker, Tim Moore, he and Berger had their disagreements many times. They also had times where they were reaching a stalemate on the budget, but they usually ended up coming up with some sort of package. What do you make of this first year of Hall's leadership and his relationship with Berger and the other chamber? Right.
There's two things that it's important for us to mention. Again, you're saying Hall's first year. He really wants to put on mark on what he wants to, have. He had his kind of more signature issues when he was Rules Chair. Of course, he's not new to the House, but what he's going to be known for. And one thing on the tax front is he started this Property Tax Reform Committee. So that's a study committee that's met in December, meet in January, before they have voting sessions. And then Berger has a primary, and everybody who has a primary, the changes how you are thinking with like decisions you'll be making if you're a sitting lawmaker. So that's a factor with Berger. He's worried about his campaign and primary, and assuming he comes out of that after that primary election, and all of the people in the House and Republican caucuses thinking about, is this going to be used against me as I'm running? That might kind of change once they're free and clear, if they're successful. And Hall is really doubled down on wanting North Carolina to be number one for starting teacher pay in the Southeast, and it's yet to be seen if we'll get closer to that goal. We are already out of time for the first half. Big issues of this past year are the same, similar issues going into 2026. After the break, I'll be back with our DC correspondent, Danielle Battaglia. Kyle, thank you for being on first half.
Thank you.
Score more with the college-branded Venmo debit card and earn up to 5% cash back with Venmo Stash. Got paid back? With the Venmo debit card, you can instantly access your balance and spend on what you want, like game day snacks, gear, tickets, and more. The more you do, the more cash back you can earn. Plus, there's no monthly fee or minimum balance. Sign up now at Venmo.com/collegecard. The Venmo MasterCard is issued by the Bancorp Bank N.A. Select schools available. Venmo Stash terms and exclusions apply at venmo.me/stash terms. Max $100 cash back per month.
So good, so good, so good.
New spring arrivals are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Get ready to save big with up to 60% off Rag & Bone, Marc Jacobs, Free People, and more.
How did I not know Rack has Adidas?
Because there's always something new.
Join the Nordy Club to unlock exclusive discounts, shop new arrivals first, and more. Plus, buy online and pick up at your favorite Rack store for free. Great brands, great prices. That's why you Rack.
You're listening to Under the Dome. I'm Capitol Bureau Chief Dawn Vaughan, and for the second half of our Look Back and Look Ahead, I'm joined by DC correspondent Danielle Battaglia. I talked with Kyle for the first half of the show about all of the state government and politics. We're going to look at the federal government and politics, and this year has obviously been a wild one. The first year of the second term of President Trump began with Doge and Elon Musk and a whole bunch of stuff with federal workers losing their jobs. That was almost a year ago now. Meanwhile, U.S. Senator Thom Tillis got out of the race. The Lumbee recognition just happened. There are a lot of big stories to cover. Danielle, let's start maybe chronological with kind of this really big impact on the federal workforce was what happened. I guess one of the things, maybe one of the biggest things that happened after the Trump's term started. I know it's a fire hose of things every single day.
It is a fire hose, and I can't believe we're in the same year that Doge happened because so much has happened since then. But yeah, this was the Department of Government Efficiency. It's not a real department within the federal government, or not a real recognized department, but it is real in the eyes of President Donald Trump. And I think, the highlight of what Doge is Elon Musk, the billionaire that owns Tesla, coming on stage with a chainsaw, waving it over his head very unsafely and saying he's going to cut the federal government. They were trying to get rid of wasteful spending. There was a lot of secrecy behind what they were doing. There was a lot of concern for federal officials and whether they would continue to have jobs or not. It was a big deal. And there was also like the impact in North Carolina alone, all over the state, like different buildings were being sold off, different employees were losing their jobs. It was hard to track. It was a lot to track. I think everyone in our newsroom had some piece of that at some point. Donald Trump is a force that I don't think can be quantified easily. And, there's just so much news with him.
I remember there were protests around the country and a lot in North Carolina. One of the ones that I had covered here was a lot of people marching around the Capitol grounds in downtown Raleigh. And it wasn't just people who were unhappy with him and with, Elon Musk in general, but a lot of federal workers whose lives were impacted, who felt really taken for granted and really just being punished for being, public servants, and people very reluctant to talk about it, and people worried about their jobs. And that I feel like that dominated maybe the first couple months. The end result, did the government save any of our taxpayer money? Do we have proof of that?
I don't think we do, to be honest. They had a whole website devoted to talking about that specific, like how much money they were saving. But like reporters were constantly finding that it was overestimated. Stuff was in there that shouldn't have been in. And, Doge actually still exists. I don't think people realize that, but the department is still ongoing. Their footprint is not as large without Elon Musk behind it, but they are still trying to cut.
Mm-hmm. Another big national news, big North Carolina news is Senator Tillis. So tell us about Tillis.
Tillis has been interesting to watch because at the start of the year, he was really frustrating constituents because he is not one that censors himself, we'll say. And so some of the moves he was making, sorry, my dog is wrestling with me that you all can't see, but it's happening, which is why I'm pausing. So what Tom Tillis, he doesn't mince words. And we were seeing all these people come in with nominations that a lot of his constituents thought he would be against, and he was voting them through. Behind the scenes, there was a lot of tension in his body. Like you could just see it as he walked through the halls. He was tense. His mood was harsher. And this all basically exploded in June when he decided that he had had enough when it came to the One Big Beautiful Bill. This was President Donald Trump's bill that was supposed to basically encompass all his campaign promises and was going to do a lot of different things. But his hang-up, Tom Tillis's hang-up, was that he was worried about healthcare cuts and how this was going to impact North Carolinians. At the time, it was like 600,000 people that he was worried would lose healthcare funding. That number's changed a little bit as more estimates have come in, and I'm not sure what we have fully landed on, except several 100,000 people. But he decided he had enough. He wasn't going to support the One Big Beautiful Bill. He was fighting with his colleagues to get this taken out to help North Carolinians. He couldn't win it. He ended up in a public spat with the president, and he decided to end his reelection campaign and retire from Congress. Now, I will say, as I talk about the tension and anger that he seemed to be emulating, I've had even Capitol staff, and I'm talking like the people who operate the elevators, tell me he's a whole different man post retirement announcement. He's so much lighter and bouncier, and he's not mincing words anymore either.
What does this mean for 2026 and how Tillis is going to be this coming year?
Well, I think for Tillis, you're going to see a lawmaker who can do what he wants. There's no consequences, isn't the right word, but there's nothing stopping him from making the choices he wants to make. We saw that this week. While we're recording this, he came out against former Representative Mark Walker. He said, we need to find a new guy for a role that the president has nominated him, looking at religious freedom. And, he's more willing to make those decisions to not support the president.
People are listening to this. It's running a few days before Christmas. The Lumbee recognition was really just huge news for years, and you've been covering this for a long time. What does this mean looking into the coming year for the Lumbees and for the state?
So this is a monumental occasion for the Lumbee tribe, and I really want to know the ramifications it's going to have for the Cherokee tribe of North Carolina. They've been full on not supportive of the Lumbee tribe. And so one of the questions I was asking lawmakers as this passed was, what is your relationship going to be like going forward? They're hoping it's unchanged, but that's not very clear right now. With the Lumbees particularly, this is 137 years in the making. They began this fight in 1888, trying to get education funding for their children. And they've been ignored this entire time. In 1956, they passed a bill to give them recognition. However, it didn't include benefits that are given to every other tribe in the country that has federal recognition. These are things like agriculture, healthcare, education, economic development. They'll be able to open a casino. Now, those benefits, to get this into the bill, they had to make an agreement with some other lawmakers that these benefits won't kick in for 3 years. And then after 3 years, it's going to go into effect. So there's going to be a slight delay in getting some of those benefits to them. But I think they're satisfied that they're finally recognized. And one thing that I was hearing over and over as this was passing is like, this is finally giving them basically everyone who's talked about how they're not real or their race is false, their culture is false, their heritage is false. This finally seals it in federal law that this is a real tribe and gives them legitimacy. And more than anything, I think that's what they were looking for.
All right, we're almost out of time. Is there anything else that was a big story this year that you see having ramifications in the coming year?
I would say with Senator Tillis retiring, definitely watch the 2026 election because there could be major changes, including a flip of the seat to Democrats. And if that happens, that's going to have huge ramifications on both the House and the Senate and how they operate under President Donald Trump.
Okay. I want to thank Danielle, our DC correspondent, for being on for the second half with a look at the federal government. Next week, the podcast is going to be on a holiday break, but we'll return the first week in January. I'll have a special guest on that episode, Governor Josh Stein, as we look ahead to 2026. From everyone here at the NNO, I'm Dawn Vaughan, Danielle Battaglia, producer Kevin Keister. Happy holidays, and we'll talk to you again soon.
For more from our politics team, subscribe to the News and Observer at newsobserver.com/subscribe. Follow us on Twitter at Under the Dome and NC Insider, and sign up for our weekly political newsletter, also called Under the Dome, at newsobserver.com/newsletters. Thanks for listening.